When Prince Harry took his seat on the Graham Norton Show, no one expected the evening to spiral into one of the most unforgettable TV moments in recent memory. But that's exactly what happened, and it all started with one simple question. At first, the vibe was playful. Jokes were flying, the audience was loving it, and Harry seemed at ease, smiling like he'd finally found neutral ground away from royal pressure and paparazzi flashbulbs. But then, Graham Norton did what Graham Norton does best. He cut through the polish. No royal script. No PR safety net. Just a cheeky but calculated jab that hit far too close to home. Within minutes, that red sofa turned into a pressure cooker. Tension thickened. Harry's composure cracked. And what began as light banter erupted into a verbal showdown that left the audience stunned and the cameras rolling. This wasn't just another celebrity interview gone awkward. It was a public unmasking. A prince, clearly cornered. A host who refused to bow. And a conversation that shattered the boundary between royal mystique and brutal reality. Before we unravel the rest of this clash, don't forget to like this video, drop a comment below, and hit that subscribe button if you want more raw, unfiltered moments like this. Now let me ask you, was this meltdown sparked by one too many personal questions? Or was it the harsh realization that Harry's story, once carefully curated, was no longer his alone to tell? Because what happened next changed everything. The stage lights gleamed. The audience roared, and the energy in the room buzzed with that signature Graham Norton charm, warm, quick-witted, and just a little bit wicked. The night had already been a success. A lively cooking demo had everyone laughing, a beloved actress shared a few cheeky anecdotes, and everything was flowing like a well-rehearsed symphony. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Prince Harry stepped onto the set to thunderous applause. Dressed smartly but casual, he looked the part. Relaxed, approachable, and confident. Flashing that rehearsed, familiar smile that's graced countless magazine covers and charity stages. He strolled over, took his place on the iconic red sofa and nodded to the crowd like a man used to the spotlight. But hoping tonight would be different. Graham leaned in with the usual charm. "Lovely to have you here, Your Highness. How's life treating you these days?" Softball question? Nothing too invasive. A comfortable opener designed to ease the guest into friendly waters, Harry answered like a pro, polished but heartfelt. He spoke of advocacy work, mental health awareness, and new beginnings. The audience lapped it up. For the first few minutes, it was all going to plan, but seasoned viewers of the Graham Norton Show know one thing. It never stays safe for long. That's when Graham's tone shifted ever so slightly. Still smiling, still light, but with that glint in his eye that meant trouble was coming, you know. "Harry," he said, the mischief barely veiled in his voice. "We've all been rather fascinated lately with this stepping back business. Must have been quite the family dinner conversation, deciding to bow out of royal duties." A pause, a nervous chuckle from the audience. Harry's posture changed, subtle but undeniable. His smile didn't vanish, it simply stiffened. The warmth in his eyes cooled a few degrees, shoulders straightened, chin rose just slightly. "Well," he said, keeping his voice measured. "Like I've mentioned before, it was a family decision, and we're all finding our paths forward together." The kind of line that's been polished in interviews and rehearsed with media advisors, but Graham didn't blink, of course. "Of course," he said with that trademark velvet sarcasm. "But surely someone had a few strong opinions when you floated the idea of moving to California. I mean, you don't just pack up and cross the ocean without at least one raised eyebrow, do you?" The crowd laughed, but it wasn't the light, carefree laughter from earlier. This was different, tighter, sharper. People leaned forward, sensing the shift, and Harry laughed too, but not convincingly. It was the kind of laugh people give when they're trying to keep the lid on a boiling pot. "You know, Graham," he said, carefully, "family discussions belong within the family. I think most people would agree with that." His words were calm, but there was a current underneath, a slight edge, a quiet warning. Still, Graham pressed forward as only he can. "Absolutely," he said, nodding with mock understanding. "Privacy's sacred. Although, I must say, for a family so protective of their privacy, you lot do seem to be in the headlines rather a lot." Laughter again, but now the studio had a different vibe entirely. Attention was building. You could feel it in the silence between the jokes. Harry's jaw clenched. Not dramatically, not cartoonishly, just enough that anyone watching closely could see it. His gaze sharpened. "Media has a way of twisting things," he said slowly, "of turning private moments into public spectacle." Graham didn't blink. His next words were calm but had teeth. "Oh, no doubt," he said, though one could argue. "When you sit down for international interviews, write best-selling memoirs, and release documentaries about your life, you're, well, inviting the conversation, aren't you?" Silence. Not a sound from the audience. The air had shifted. This wasn't a talk show anymore. This was a reckoning. And what Harry said next would set the tone for the storm that was coming. But Graham hadn't even asked the hardest question yet, and when he did, the room would never be the same. Harry's response was measured, but the fire behind his eyes was starting to show. "There's a difference," he said, his voice just a shade louder now, between sharing your truth and letting others profit from your pain. It landed. With weight. His words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. "I've lived with media intrusion since I was a child," he continued, "and there comes a point where you either stay silent forever or you speak up before someone else tells your story for you." There was emotion in his voice now, not anger just yet, but that low, simmering frustration that comes from years of being misrepresented. Graham nodded slowly, leaning forward slightly. His smile had faded, but his tone stayed smooth, calculated. "Even I understand that," he said. "Truly, I do. But you must see the irony. Complaining about media attention while actively participating in it. Books, interviews, streaming specials." His sentence trailed off, letting the implications settle. Harry stiffened, his cheeks flushed, and for a fleeting moment the polished mask cracked. "You know what, Graham?" he said, his tone shifting harder now. "What you're missing, what so many people miss, is that when you've spent your whole life with someone else narrating your story, taking back control isn't hypocrisy, it's survival." The audience was silent now, gripped. Number 1 fidgeted. No one whispered. Everyone could feel the moment teetering between control and combustion. Graham's brow raised slightly. "I see," he said quietly. "But if you're fighting for your voice, why is it that every time someone asks a tough question, it feels like you're trying to shut it down?" And just like that, the gloves were off. Harry's eyes narrowed. He didn't shout. He didn't explode. But his entire posture screamed resistance. "Because it's not a question, Graham," he snapped. "It's judgment dressed up as curiosity." Graham held his ground, hands folded, gaze steady. "Is it judgment?" he asked. "Or accountability?" The line cut like glass.com, quiet and deeply provocative. Harry stood abruptly. The sharp scrape of the chair startled the room. Everyone flinched. The tension was now unbearable. "I came here," he said, pointing slightly toward Graham, "thinking we could have a real conversation, civil, respectful." Graham remained seated, eyes locked on Harry like a veteran negotiator who'd seen this kind of unraveling before. "That's exactly what I'm trying to have," he replied. "A real conversation, one that doesn't just skim the surface." Harry's jaw tightened again. "No, what you're trying to do is poke," he snapped. "You want sound bites? You want the outburst, the quote, the clip that gets replayed. That's not a conversation. It's a trap." Graham's voice dipped lower. Firmer. "Harry, if asking honest questions feels like a trap, maybe the problem isn't the questions." That line, simple, direct, devastating, stopped Harry in his tracks. He stared at Graham, his chest rising and falling, his mouth slightly open as if searching for a reply that wouldn't give Graham the satisfaction of a win. The other guests on the couch had gone still. You could almost see them trying to disappear into the background, desperately hoping the camera wouldn't cut to their frozen expressions. And Graham didn't back down an inch. "Sit down, Harry," he said softly, not as a command, but as an invitation with weight behind it. "We're not finished." And for a second it looked like Harry might. That he'd take a breath, recalibrate, and meet the conversation head on. But what he did instead would send the room spiraling, because the next thing out of Harry's mouth wasn't just personal, it was nuclear. And once said, it couldn't be taken back. Harry didn't sit down. Instead, he stepped forward, not in aggression, but with the steady force of someone who felt like he had just been pushed too far. His voice dropped, quiet but laced with something darker. "You want to know what the real issue is, Graham," he said, the words low and deliberate. "The real issue is people like you thinking you have some kind of right to dissect every corner of my life, my family, my marriage, my children, as if we're content for your late-night entertainment." The audience didn't move. There wasn't even a cough, a shuffle, nothing. Just the hum of stage lights and the weight of everything unsaid. Graham blinked once, his tone carefully neutral. "People like me," he repeated. "Television hosts. Or are we talking about something a little broader?" Harry didn't miss a beat. "I'm talking about anyone who profits off other people's pain," he snapped. "You sit in that chair, make jokes about things that have caused real damage, and you wrap it all in clever punchlines. But it's not harmless fun when you're the one being laughed at." Now, Graham leaned back, fingers steepled under his chin. "I've been doing this a long time," he said evenly, "and I've always tried to treat my guests with dignity. But part of treating people like adults is asking questions they might not want to answer." Harry's laugh was short and bitter. "Questions," he echoed. "You're calling what you're doing Asking questions? You just accused me live of being a hypocrite. I didn't accuse, Graham corrected sharply. I observed. There's a difference. And I'm not the only one who's noticed the contradiction. That was the spark. The moment when Harry stopped trying to hold back. Oh, you've noticed contradictions, he snapped. Then maybe you should consider what it's like to have your entire life broadcasted, twisted, and speculated on by people who don't know a single real thing about you. Maybe then you'd understand why some of us try to reclaim that narrative. Graham's face lost its warmth. His tone cooled. What I understand, he said, is that you've chosen to be public when it suits you. You sat down for exclusive interviews. You wrote a memoir. You signed a deal with Netflix. That's not privacy, Harry. That's strategy. There was a flash in Harry's eyes now, not just frustration, something deeper, personal. You think this is strategy? He said. Trying to protect my family, my wife, my children. From the same feeding frenzy that killed my mother. You think that's some PR campaign? And then it happened? The room changed. Graham's face shifted, not in fear, but in recognition. He knew they had just crossed the line into sacred territory, but he didn't flinch. I wouldn't bring your mother into this, he said quietly. That's not fair. Not to her. Not to this moment. Harry froze. His voice, when it came, was a whisper soaked in anger. You don't get to say her name, he said. You didn't know her. You didn't lose her. You didn't watch the headlines twist her into something she wasn't. No, Graham replied, eyes hardening, slightly. But I know enough to say this. Your mother was hounded. Yes. But she also chose to speak her truth in ways that didn't tear down everyone around her. There's a difference between using your voice and using your pain like a weapon. The audience wasn't breathing. This wasn't just a disagreement. Now it was something raw, something dangerously close to real. Harry's hands were clenched at his sides. You think I'm weaponizing my grief? He said, barely above a whisper. You think I'm standing here defending my family because it gets me headlines? I think, Graham said calmly, that there's a point where pain becomes a shield. And when people get too close to the truth, you use that shield to deflect instead of reflect. That line landed hard. Harry turned slightly as if to walk away, but stopped. He couldn't leave. Not yet, because this wasn't just about Graham anymore. This was about the world watching. About every headline he'd tried to escape. Now, staring him in the face on national television, and just when it seemed like things might de-escalate, Harry said something no one expected, something that would echo far beyond that studio. Harry didn't walk off. Instead, he turned back toward Graham, not backing down. Not surrendering, but fueled by something deeper now. Fury, yes, but also heartbreak, exhaustion, maybe even betrayal. Sit there, he said slowly, his voice trembling with restrained rage, pretending to ask the hard questions. But let's not lie about what's happening here. This isn't journalism. This isn't honesty. It's a performance for ratings, for clout, for applause from people who will never understand what it's like to be hunted for sport. Graham remained still, but his jaw was tight now. Harry, he said, evenly but with an edge. You came on this show? You accepted the platform? You knew what kind of conversations happen here. I didn't ambush you. I gave you the same courtesy. I give everyone honest questions and a seat on my couch. Harry's voice sharpened. You call this courtesy? Tearing down everything I've tried to rebuild? Mocking the choices I made to protect my wife and children? No one's mocking your choices, Graham said firmly. What I'm doing is asking why the man who says he wants privacy keeps showing up in the public square. Asking the world to listen. That hit hard, and Harry snapped. Oh, I get it now, he said, laughing bitterly. You think this is about fame, about publicity, but it's not. It never was. I've been trying to protect my family from the same storm that destroyed my mother, and all you see is a PR stunt. Graham exhaled, slow and deliberate. Your mother's death was a tragedy. But dragging her name into every argument doesn't make your point stronger. It makes it harder to hear the truth. Harry's eyes flared. How dare you, he said, stepping forward again. How dare you suggest I'm using her memory? Like a tool? You didn't know her. You didn't grieve her. You have no right to decide what honors her and what doesn't. And you, Graham said, rising from his seat now, his voice no longer soft. Don't get to use her as a shield every time someone challenges your version of events. Diana was adored, but you're not her, Harry, and hiding behind her name won't stop people from asking why you've said one thing and done another. Now they were both standing eye to eye. No more talk show. No more smiles. Just a brutal, honest standoff between two men who represented two very different versions of truth. You want honesty? Harry said, nearly shouting. Fine. The truth is, I am sick of people like you, comfortable, smug, untouchable, lecturing me about responsibility. You've never had to choose between your family and your soul. Graham raised his chin. And yet here you are, he said coldly, a prince born into privilege, speaking as though you've lived without choice. Do you hear yourself? Do you hear what it sounds like to people who work 2 jobs just to survive? Harry's voice cracked. You think this life is privilege? Living under a microscope, being told who to love, what to say, what to believe, from birth, watching your mother die in a car crash because the press wouldn't leave her alone? I think, Graham replied, his voice rising just enough to carry, that people would trade places with you in a heartbeat if it meant safety for their children, food on the table, or shelter at night. And I think if you want the freedom to walk away, you can't keep dragging the chains of royalty behind you every time you want sympathy. Harry looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. There was silence again, the kind that makes time feel frozen. You think I want sympathy? He asked. Is that what you think this is? Graham didn't answer. Instead, he sat back down, folded his hands, and said, I think you want the world to listen, but the problem is, the world has questions, and when it asks them, you call. That cruelty. Harry stood there visibly shaking. Not from fear, from rage, from disappointment, from the realization that, no matter how far he ran, this same confrontation would find him again. In studios, on stages, in headlines always. You know what, Graham? He said finally, his voice steady now, ice cold. Behind all that charm and cleverness, you're just another vulture, picking apart people's pain because it makes for a better segment. Graham didn't flinch. And what does that make you, Harry? He asked. The noble victim? Or the man who demands applause for walking away from a palace while writing chapter after chapter about the people still inside it? Harry's mouth opened to respond, but nothing came, because deep down, part of him knew that's exactly what people were asking, but Harry wasn't done yet, and what he said next would shift the studio from tense to explosive. Harry stood still for a long moment, the silence pressing down on him like a spotlight. Then he spoke, low and furious. You pretend to stand for truth, he said, but what you really stand for is ratings. Engagement, outrage that keeps people glued to their screens. Graham didn't interrupt. He simply watched, calmly, coolly, as Harry's voice grew louder. You sit there judging me, pretending you understand my life, but you have no idea what it's like to lose everything familiar just to gain a little peace. Now, it was Graham who stood again, slowly. I don't claim to understand your grief, he said, but don't mistake being challenged for being attacked. You came here expecting praise. What you got was honesty. Harry's face twisted. No, he said, voice rising. What I got was ambushed, dressed up as entertainment. You've made a career off being clever, off turning people into punchlines. But, this time, you're the one who's gone too far. Graham's eyes narrowed. No, Harry. What's gone too far is the expectation that you should be immune to scrutiny simply because you've suffered. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. They weren't just witnessing a disagreement anymore. This had become a moral war. Truth versus perception, pain versus privilege, past versus present. You think I'm trying to escape accountability? Harry asked, almost incredulous. I've done everything in front of the world. I've told my story, admitted my mistakes. What more do you people want from me? We want consistency, Graham fired back. You can't demand privacy and release memoirs. You can't walk away from duty and then use the royal title as a brand. People are confused, and when they ask why, you explode. Harry turned to the audience now, as if appealing directly to them. Would you not do everything you could to protect the people you love? He asked. Wouldn't you speak out if the very system that destroyed your mother started targeting your wife? But this time the room was divided. Some nodded, others sat frozen, unsure whether to sympathize or recoil. Graham watched him closely. You keep saying the system destroyed your mother, he said quietly, but what you won't admit is that you've been feeding that same system since the day you left. Harry's eyes flared again. You don't get to say that, he snapped. You don't get to sit there on your little stage and pretend you know what I've lived through. And you, Graham said, his voice rising, for the first time, don't get to weaponize that trauma every time someone questions your behavior. The tension reached its peak. Harry stepped forward again, closer now. His voice dropped into a cold, measured growl. You think I want this circus? He said. You think I enjoy being talked about, picked apart, memed, and mocked? Am I trying to raise my family in peace? But you and everyone like you keep dragging me back into the spotlight. And yet, here you are, Graham replied, sitting in front of cameras. Again, choosing the stage again. Harry laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about choices? He said. Fine, I chose to walk away from a life that was killing me. I chose my mental health, my wife, my children. And if that upsets you, If it makes me inconvenient for your narrative, that's your problem. Graham didn't blink. You chose to tell your story on your terms, but stories once told belong to everyone, and you don't get to silence people just because you don't like how they interpret it. Now Harry's tone shifted again from fury to menace. You think this is all harmless, he said. You think your little jabs don't do damage, but every snide comment, every joke, every smirk, it chips away. And one day someone won't survive it? Graham's expression changed. Not fear, but warning. Don't do that, he said. Don't twist accountability into victimhood. You came here to be heard. You were heard. But what you've shown is that hearing questions you don't like feels like an attack. Harry's face was flushed now, his hands clenched at his sides. You don't get to lecture me about victimhood, he said. You've never had to watch your life implode on the front page of every newspaper. Graham tilted his head slightly. No, but I've also never sold my story in an international bidding war. A loud, stunned ooh-hoo echoed from the crowd. The final crack had formed. Something irreparable had been said. Harry stepped back, like he'd been physically struck. I came here thinking maybe, just maybe, someone in the British media could treat me like a human being. Graham shrugged. And I came here thinking maybe a prince could handle a real conversation. And, just like that, Harry snapped. What came next would turn a tense exchange into television infamy. Harry was trembling now. His voice when he spoke again was no longer just angry, it was wounded. You think I came here for applause, he asked, incredulous? I came here hoping for a moment of honesty. Not this, not another ambush, not more baiting and cheap shots dressed up as clever conversation. Graham stayed silent for a beat, then replied quietly, Harry, you didn't walk into an ambush. You walked into a mirror, and maybe you just didn't like what you saw. That did it, something in Harry snapped. You know what? He said, stepping away from the couch, voice shaking with fury. I'm done with this. I'm done with you. I'm done with all of it. He turned toward the crew, gesturing wildly. Cut the cameras. Now, this interview is over. A low hum rippled across the audience, whispers, gasps, shifting bodies on the edge of their seats. Some looked horrified. Others looked exhilarated. But all of them knew they were witnessing something that would be replayed 1,000 times before morning. Graham remained still, composed, but there was an unmistakable tension in his posture now, like a man who knew the gravity of what was happening and chose not to blink. Walking away again? Harry, he asked, voice soft, almost mournful. Is that the plan? Just like the palace? Just like your country? Just like every tough conversation you don't want to have? Harry spun back around, eyes blazing. I'm not running away, he growled. I'm removing myself from a toxic space. There's a difference. Graham's tone darkened. Is there? Because from here, it looks a lot like deflection. Like every time someone asks you to face contradictions, you shout trauma and leave the room. You don't get to say that, Harry snapped. You don't get to pretend you care about mental health while mocking someone for reaching their limit. I'm not mocking, Graham said firmly. I'm holding you accountable. You've made millions from telling your story, and yet every time someone dares to question the version you sold, it's suddenly off limits. Harry's hands curled into fists. His voice cracked again. You think I'm profiting from pain? My pain isn't a business. My story isn't a brand. It's survival. Graham nodded slowly, then asked, then why threaten people when they don't agree with it? Why demand they be silenced, fired, blacklisted, just for asking uncomfortable questions? Harry didn't respond. He turned, storming toward the exit, tossing a final line over his shoulder. You haven't heard the last of this, Graham. Trust me, you have no idea what you've started. But Graham didn't flinch. He sat back down, straightened his blazer and looked into the camera with unsettling calm. Well, he said, lips curving into the faintest of smiles. I think that went rather well. The audience didn't know whether to laugh or hold their breath. Some clapped hesitantly. Others stared, stunned. But one thing was certain, the red sofa had never seen anything like this before. Behind the scenes, security rushed to intercept, Harry unsure whether to assist or retreat. The other guests remained frozen in place, unsure whether to exit or pretend they hadn't just witnessed a breakdown broadcast live. And Graham. He turned to the audience, leaned forward with one last thought. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Prince Harry. A man torn between truth and legacy, between privacy and the spotlight. And tonight, we saw what happens when those worlds collide. He paused, and maybe now, the world will finally stop pretending those two things can exist at the same time. Fade out. Ending CTA, what do you think really pushed Harry over the edge? Was Graham right to hold him accountable, or did he cross a line that no host should ever step over? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and if you found this breakdown as explosive as we did, Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more real talk behind the curtain of celebrity culture.